this is going to be the first in the series of watercolor tutorials for adults. We're going to keep it simple with a basic drawing, which you can follow along with me, do your own, or you can go to my website and download the drawing, which you can then print at home onto Bristol board or watercolor paper. Then just follow along with me in the painting. We're going to use two colors, so keeping it, very limited for this first one. And style-wise, I'm going to stick with my own kind of cartoony style. I do a lot of outlines, so that's kind of what we're going to be working with to begin with. All right, if you're ready. Oh, actually, before this, if you haven't already looked at my setup video and you need to kind of check that out and get your space all ready, then jump on over to that video, get yourself all set up, come back over here and we'll get started. Now you will be able to download this drawing from the website if you want to print it out and focus on the painting. However, if you'd like to draw it, you can draw it along with me here. So first we'll start out by drawing a circle for the moon. Okay, so a big circle, then a little circle inside of that and to the side so we can get our crescent shape. And now I'm just sort of curving the edges, adding a little character, adding a nose, starting to bring this all together. I'm making some adjustments based on what I want my character to look like. You can, of course, make this different if you're drawing it on your own. It's a matter of what you like. You don't need to do the ink outline unless you want to. I wanted mine to be outlined in the ink. That way I could go in and erase my pencil lines. And in the end, it will have the black outline, which is what I want too, because this is cartoony and I do tend to like that. So oftentimes I'll do the ink outline to start. That way I can erase the pencil lines and still see the outline of whatever I'm painting. Then at the end, I'll go back on top and draw the outline on it over again, because it does tend to disappear a little bit while you're painting, or it gets kind of lighter in color. I like to use Micron or Copic or Statler. Those dry really fast, so you can go in and erase pretty soon afterwards. So I've also got some stars. We're just going to do a few, keep it simple. So I've started with circles. That way I can just map out the size and round about where it's going to go before I commit to making my star shapes. So what's important to note is that if you are painting right on top of pencil, you can use a kneaded eraser to just lightly erase it so that you don't have too much graphite, but you still can see the lines to paint in. The thing to keep in mind is that if you are painting right on top of pencil, that the pencil is going to kind of run into your colors, which is not a big issue if they're dark colors. If they're lighter colors, you're definitely going to see it. All that is done, then you would simply just give that a few moments to dry. So instead of doing the ink outline like I had done in the drawing, I decided to just go with the same version that you can download and print, where it's just a very light gray. So in this occasion, I am going to start with a all over wash of water, as opposed to mixing up the color first and making like a pool of that color. So I generally work with dried watercolor, I guess kind of like the watercolor cakes, but I don't typically do like the pools. Sometimes that would work better. Anyway, so on this occasion, what I'm doing is I'm filling in all around the moon and stars with just water, although you can see a little coloration here from not having super clean water, I guess. So once I do this step, I want to make sure to work with it while it's still wet. I don't want to give that time to soak into the paper. So what I'm going to do now that that's all on there, I'm going to use some dark blue. This is, I guess, kind of like a navy. And trying to just mix up just enough of that to reactivate the paint and touch that to the water that's already down and start to flow it through. Now, the reason I did the water first is so that I wouldn't have the paint strokes of if I had just wet the blue and gone ahead and started painting it. It would have dried into the paper a lot faster, and then you would have seen the strokes more. With this technique, it's the way I want this to look in the end is kind of, I do want it to look kind of watery. I don't want this to necessarily look like a perfect clean image where you can't tell that it's been painted so much. I want the color to kind of build up and pool in certain areas and not in others. I'm trying to make this look like a somewhat of a night sky. My version of a night sky. Now I'm just kind of going lightly around those stars and the moon for now. I'm going to go in later and get a crisper edge, but I just want to fill that up to there very lightly. And while this is still wet, I want to go ahead and add a bit more color. So next for our solar system here, I'm going to throw in some purple, doing the same thing. So I've wet the brush and just reactivating that purple, and I'm just going to kind of blot it in there. So be careful with your brush. There's a lot of different techniques you can use, and sometimes it looks like I'm smushing the paintbrush into the paper, and that can be the case, but I'm more like pushing the paint around. So I'm not just, smashing the brush in there, because then that can ruin the bristles if you just straight up and down and they splay out. So we're not going to do that. I'm adding a little bit more of the blue here to have it more saturated. So I want this darker, but I don't want to overwork it because then the paper will start to come up. So I'm just going to move this around a little bit. Add in a bit more color. So really just trying to make this look organic. Just throw in color where you think it'll look good. Not too concentrated in one area. Kind of move around a little bit. Okay, so I've given this some time to dry. If it's not too watery, you can use a hair dryer, but I generally would advise against that when you're doing that kind of technique, because then you'll just end up blowing it across the page. So you gotta let it soak in a bit. Okay, now I'm adding a bit of shadow to my moon. I want to keep the moon mostly white. So the shadow I'm using is the same color, that same bit of blue, just a very tiny bit in the brush, because that will show up very easily on the white and I don't want to overpower it. If you do, what the technique that you use to quote unquote erase it is you dry the brush and then, rinse it out, dry it again, and then go right over top of the place that you worked and you kind of soak it back up. I'm doing a little bit of this right now, so this is more as a means to spread it, not as much soak it up. So it's a little bit of both. Sometimes I leave like a little bit of water in the brush, that way I can keep moving it around, moving the paint around. Okay, now I want it a little bit darker in some spots, so going with a little bit more of the paint. And sometimes I decide I don't like it, so I use my erasing method. And now I want to outline it again. So now I want to go in and just make this a bit crisper looking. So I've got that same blue. The difference is just using this tiny brush. I forgot to mention that. I've got my tiny round brush, and I use round the most because I feel like it's the most versatile. You can get the small point, or you can, drag it out and get a wider stroke. But anyway, so I've got my small round brush, and I've just put a little bit of water on that and dipped that into, or I shouldn't say dip that in, but brush that against my dark blue kind of cake of the watercolor. So I'm just picking up enough of it, more of a concentrated version of it, not too watery. That way I can get a cleaner line and it's not going to bleed as much. This is typically why I work with the dry watercolor and just reactivate it so that I can get these kind of crisp lines. If I had the pool of watercolor, I'd have to just continuously build up the layers. So with it being dry, it's going to be, of course, more saturated. And that's just a personal preference of mine. And of course, if you need to turn the paper to make it easier, or go with the way the direction your hand is going, then go for it. So I've taped my paper down to another surface, but that surface can be easily moved. We can talk about line weight a little bit. It's always important when you're drawing too, but since we're doing such a thin outline, it's important to note that when you do a thicker, aka heavier line, that gives more weight to it. So there you go, line weight. So what I'm trying to do is a thinner line in some places, or a thinner ending, and then I'm going to go in where I want it to feel a little bit more shadow-ish and thicken up the line. So giving it different line weight in certain spots, and any piece of art usually just adds another layer to it of complexity, something more visually interesting without necessarily noticing it. Of course, I want a little bit more shadow under the nose and lip. Remember, on this one, we're just keeping it simple. There's plenty more that can be done, but I'm pretty happy with this. Another good lesson is don't overwork it. And the other thing on this one is, since it's fairly simple, if you want to do it multiple times, you can. And, try out some different techniques or draw it a different way. Hope you enjoyed this. I will be back with more soon.